taught at Reedley College, and before that at Lincoln High School and Sanger High School. And she's lived in the Kings River Valley for over 40 years. She worked with architect Arthur Dyson first when she was 25, and then when she was widowed and remarried in her 40s, to build the houses you see pictured on the front and back, and all throughout her book, recently published by Organic Architecture and Design. The title is At Home, A Client's Appreciation for Authentic Architecture. Now retired, she splits her time between Piedra, California and Woodstock, New York, and is working on a novel, and writing lyrics for her husband, Greg Lapp's music. So please join me in welcoming Deb Lapp.
Okay, thank you for coming. I want you to think back to a favorite space from childhood. From the place where you were when you were a child, what was your favorite space? I have another question. When you walk into a restaurant, where do you choose to sit? Close your eyes and think about a feeling of complete peace. What color do you see? It's questions like these that Art Dyson asks you long before he asks how many bedrooms or bathrooms or where you want the windows. He asks you questions that involve psychology, philosophy, and how you live your life day in and day out. And that is what leads to its authenticity. I begin this book with a description of my architectural history, you know, the story that brought me into, through, and out of all of these houses. And then I spend a little bit of time talking about why I use the word authentic, which I revised and revised and revised and revised. Both of my houses fit solidly in the category called organic architecture, but the body of art's work and the body of work that I'm talking about includes things that would not fit under organic architecture, things that are much more angular, or things that would fit in even a brutalist style. But the idea is that it's authentic to the purpose and the people that it intends to house. In the second chapter, I'm going to read just 2 paragraphs. This is a house as reflection of ourselves and our aspirations, something that I think pretty deeply. I begin with a quote by George Eliot from Middlemarch: "It is never too late to be what you might have been." The space you choose to inhabit is an expression of your style, your values, aspirations, and self-image. It seems to me, sadly, that most houses aspire to be more ordinary than the extraordinary people inside of them. Architectural apathy, choosing not to consciously choose the fundamental design of your house, is also a decision. If you care about space, as I do, the choice is important. What you wear, what you eat, what you drive, where you vacation, all express your style and your priorities. You have to eat, you have to live somewhere. Careless choices in food can have adverse health consequences. Architectural fast food can likewise make you sick. Abdicating choice of dress for a uniform may inadvertently suppress your individuality. And I go on like that for the chapter. In chapter 3, this is where I really wanted to spend the time. It's how architecture impacts our lives and well-being. I call the chapter ARCHITHERAPY. First, we shape our buildings, then they shape us, said Winston Churchill. I have thought a lot about the psychological impact of space and how the space we inhabit affects the way we feel and act. I call this ARCHITHERAPY. From Barbara Harwood's The Healing House, I learned that Churchill delivered his comment about ARCHITHERAPY twice. Once when addressing the English Architectural Association in 1924, and again to advocate the rebuilding of Parliament in 1943. I view the statesman's words as cautionary. Beware of how we shape our buildings, lest they shape us in unintended ways. Politically speaking, we live in a society that is increasingly stratified. Ostentatious estates and gated tract mansions stand in stark contrast to tract shacks and mobile homes. It's possible the disparity will lead to pitchforks. The loneliness of the one sharply contrasts the overcrowded conditions of the other. In the news, we see a suburban couple armed, pointing weapons at peaceful protesters marching by. Communities are rigidly homogeneous, and the result is utter misunderstanding and mistrust between the different groups of people. Houses designed for an income-based stratum ignore the individual personalities of people within that group, at society's peril. I like to drive through older, modest neighborhoods, where the designs, while not notable, often present interesting and particular choices, and each house has an earnest personality. It's heartening to see neighborhoods like these across the country rejuvenating and translating the individuality and aspirations of the new owners into architectural renewal, so the architecture can support and nourish them in return. To successfully achieve form, architecture as inhabited art must reflect the specific culture of the minds of those who live there. That's where art comes in those questions. By subjecting people to controlled environments, Dyson says, you can control to a certain extent their whole attitude, both psychologically and physiologically. You can raise their blood pressure, you can lower it. You can control a whole wide range of things. You need to know how these things work to begin with, and then you need to intuit how your clients are going to respond. It only makes sense that a home should instill peace, stability, and just the right amount of stimulation. On a summer day, a friend called to tell me her husband was seriously ill. Rather than talk on the phone, she drove up the hill, and in this peaceful space, we talked about the options, the issues, and everything else, and she left much calmer and fortified. When my artist daughter faced a stressful episode in her life, she flew from New York City for what she called river house therapy. Greg and I feel soothed and well in our house. At the same time, the glass and light and curve and shadow energize us. Musician and Dyson client Bill Kelly says he feels more creative in his home. He's easily overstimulated if there's too much going on in a room, if there's too much clutter. Kelly's son Kevin, who is a high-functioning autistic, thrives in his home, he says. In an overstimulating environment, Kevin can become agitated or act out. Kelly said, but quote, when he's at this house, he's noticeably more calm than when he's elsewhere. Kevin came in the room while we were talking and sat down as calmly as his father had testified. He sat back in his chair and listened for a while before he went on to do something else. For me, there's the problem of the square. When I must work in a close rectilinear space, I subconsciously cock my chair at an angle. I'll feel nervous and a little trapped. Heidi Julavitz in The Folded Clock catalogs rooms which lack escape options or have too many unprotected entrances, obviously problems for different types of people. She wonders if, quote, people mistook for ghost sightings what was, in fact, a primal fear response to poorly arranged rooms. My office at the college, for instance, had a fixed window facing the blank side of the forestry building, lack of escape options, and on the opposite side, a narrow glass panel that some professors cover up, and a solid door, which I, with apologies to my dear colleagues, never ever closed, and faced when I wasn't glued to the computer. "Do you want me to close the door, Mrs. Lapp?" students asked as they left. It's all I can do not to fling myself at the door to keep it from shutting. I notice that we borrow expressions from rectilinear architecture, such as boxed in and cornered, to express a desperate sort of constraint. Architecturally, too many boxed-in corners limit our freedom. Writing in La Arquitectura, architect Carl Ashley Smith suggests of Arthur Dyson's work, quote, Dyson's architecture has captured a constituent element of the American spirit, the contradictory desire of being rooted, settled into the land, and yet to be free to roam the vastness of the frontiers, to be ever exploring, growing, and changing. Dyson client Tom Jacksha compares inhabiting a rectilinear house which is designed to protect a person from nature to inhabiting a Dyson or Mickey Munich home which flows with nature's rhythms, quote, with the harmony between man and nature. It's like saying, I'm back to where I'm supposed to be. He extols their Sumner Hill house as, quote, aggressively reaching out to nature. I think it has to do with balance. In every part of life, we hope to achieve balance. In our diets, in our work-play dynamic, the yin and yang of our relationships, give and take. Greg will feel overly busy at work and concerts and touring gigs and looming AP tests his students hoped to pass. But by the time I would hear the gate open, he had plugged in his car, slung his briefcase on the counter just inside the door, and I could see him physically adjust his posture, sigh deeply, and smile. Few of us are entirely well-balanced, writes Alain de Botton in Art as Therapy. So many different factors in our attitudes and daily routines send our emotions inclining, quote, grievously in one direction or another. The philosopher diagnoses a series of extremes you may recognize. Quote, we may, for example, have a tendency to be too complacent or too insecure, too trusting or too suspicious, too serious or too lighthearted. He contends art, and I would say architecture in particular, can put us in touch with concentrated doses of our missing dispositions and thereby restore a measure of equilibrium to our listing inner selves.